going to go ahead and get started. Hello, my name is Sarah Mae Roberts, and I am one of the student organizers on the Oregon Brain Tank, which is a part of the Community Conversations umbrella, for lack of a better word. And our aim is to bring academics into housing through panels like this. The specific panel is understanding the social constructs of language, accent, and dialect. At this time, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Undergraduate Studies, the Robert D. Clark Honors College, University Housing, and UO Libraries, as well as what I'm blanking on right now. It'll come back to me. But anyway, thanks to our sponsors for helping us put this event together. I would also like to introduce our panelists for tonight. Lucy Gubbins is an undergraduate student here at the University of Oregon. She's working on an undergraduate research on accent perception, right? And Emily Mosqueda is a speech-language pathologist for EC Cares. And thank you both for joining us.
So this evening, the topic is accents and dialects. As a speech-language pathologist, I'll take a stab at it. And an accent can be a variation of sounds that are used in someone's language. And each person can really have their own accent, and it's called an idiolect. So, there's different areas of the country, or even countries, and on continents, they have their own accents, and it's really the difference in sounds. Now, a dialect is around vocabulary. So different people have a different dialect, and they may use different vocabulary words, though their accents may be the same. So you could have the same accent and a different dialect, and vice versa. So it's accent is about sounds in speech, and dialect is about the words, the vocabulary. And working with preschoolers, I work with Spanish-speaking preschoolers, and it's interesting to see what kind of accents their family backgrounds are from, depending on what Spanish-speaking country they're from. And as a speech-language pathologist, thinking of my title, pathology, I'm trying to look for variance, deviation from what's a standard accent. And I have to take into consideration where this child is from, where their family is from, and what type of accents they use, because some accents omit sounds, and that's typical. So it's important to know what omissions are typical and appropriate and which ones aren't as a speech-language pathologist. So it's a fun way to get to know about Spanish and to get to know different accents. And I'll speak later about my personal experience encountering some very different accents while acquiring my Spanish.
Hi, everyone. So I'm so excited to be here. Again, my name is Zusi. I'm a senior. I study linguistics and Japanese. And I'm currently working on, I was so excited to be invited to this panel because I'm currently working on my own research project for about 2 years. And it's on the perception and production of foreign accent among people like myself who are learning Japanese, Americans who are learning Japanese. And I will tell you that my research isn't so much on social constructs or social attitudes, but I am going to talk about that a little bit. So it's not, I'm obviously not an expert on anything, but I don't have a lot of background in this, but I did make a little PowerPoint to talk about, some of the history, some of the research that's being done, because I thought you might find it interesting. So I did want to say that at any point, if you have any questions, I want this to be very interactive and fun for everyone. Yeah, so if you have any questions, I'm going to talk about some research in it, and it should be pretty interesting and thought-provoking. So if at any point you just want to yell out something, please let me know, and we can talk about it, because this should be interactive and like a panel. So I'm just going to run through a couple of things. I thought okay, so 3 things that I want to go off very quickly is how linguists approach language. And there are lots of perceptions, there are lots of attitudes that people have about language. That's just something inherent that most people have. But linguists have 3 approaches to language that's probably important for people to know when we talk about variety in language and dialects. So the first thing is that linguistics is prescriptive, and I'm saying this because this is my background is in linguistics, and that's my perspective. So I thought that would be good to know. So the first thing is linguistics is descriptive. So that means linguists are interested in actually how language is spoken, not how it should be spoken. It's actually funny to email a linguistics professor, and probably Shireen, you might have experience in this because you study linguistics. But they're some of the most informal people to email because they, do you think that's true a little bit? Because they're not really too much caught up in these grammatical rules, like no double negatives, don't have a dangling modifier, things like that. So they can actually be quite informal. So they're interested in how people actually speak about language. The next thing that they're really one idea that's very important to linguistics is language variety is systematic. So someone doesn't have an accent or a dialect because they're lazy, because they're careless, or because they're uneducated. There's a reason why everyone has an accent, and it's because of systematic, rule-based, natural processes that every person goes through. And another thing to mention is just linguists focus on speech, so they're not very interested, well, some might be, but the focus of linguistics is on speech and not written language, because we are in the minority. Not that many people grow up being literate and being able to write their own language. So that's something that lots of English speakers have and some other speakers have, but it's not really the majority of the world. So has anyone seen this YouTube video, Amy Walker 20? Okay, so I thought it might be interesting to show. I'll just show like a minute of it. But it does kind of like, it's a fun little intro to accents, I think. So Amy Walker is an actress somewhere in the UK or the US. I don't know because I don't know what her real accent is. But this is kind of fun, and I think it'll be a nice intro. So here we go. Uh-oh, do we have... I think maybe yeah, it's still plugged in.
The New Zealand one is really good. She sounds just like Anna. Do you know Anna?
Yeah, oh, does she?
Yeah. She says like willing to.
Okay, let's see if it plays. Here we go.
Hello, my name is Amy Walker. I'm 25 years old and I was born in London, England. You're right, I'm Amy Walker. I'm 25 years old and I was born in London, weren't I? Yes, hello. My name is Amy Walker. I'm 25 years old and I was born in London, England. That's right, my name is Amy Walker and I was born in Dublin, Ireland. Hi, how are you? I'm Amy Walker. I'm 25. I was born in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Of course I'm Scottish. I'm a walker, aren't I? You know, walking like a shortbread. Comes in a wee tin with a turn on it. Buongiorno. My name is Amy Walker and I'm from Italy. Guten Tag. My name is Amy Walker. I'm 25 years old and I was born in Berlin, Germany. Hello. My name is Amy Walker. I was born in Prague, which is called Prague in Czech Republic. Hello, my name is Amy Walker and I'm from Moscow, in Russia. Bonjour, je m'appelle Amy Walker. J'ai 25 ans and I was born in Paris, in France. Hi, I'm Amy Walker. I'm 25 and I was born in Sydney, Australia. Yes, hello, I'm Amy Walker. I'm 27, 25, and I was born in Wellington, New Zealand. G'day, mate, I'm Amy Walker, and I'm true blue Aussie, mate. That's right. I'll always call Australia home. Well, hi there, Harry.
Okay, so you kind of get an idea. What are some of the accents that you guys picked up on that you heard? Australian, what else? Russian, Polish, French, yeah. Did they sound pretty accurate? Did you guys think they were good? Yeah, right. I think she's very talented. She must be an actress. I think this is her thing. But if you go on YouTube, you can actually she posts like training videos of how to do a Russian accent, and it's very interesting. And to tell you a little bit, I'm so fascinated by this because, like I said, I study the production and perception of foreign accent. So I love to hear how people can do this kind of without thinking. It's very interesting.
And it's really difficult. I mean, what she's
Yeah,
doing
absolutely.
physiologically and trying to change her airflow and pressure and her resonance. She's changing how it sounds.
Mm-hmm.
She's doing different things with different parts of her mouth. Her soft palate is lifting at different times as it would if it was her, in her native accent or dialect, whatever. We don't know. I mean, she was doing this so well. It's difficult to know, but with that precision, I mean, speaking is the most fine motor activity that we do. Fine motor being writing or stringing beads type of thing. I work with preschoolers, so that was my example. But if you think about it, when a child is learning to grow, they have to crawl before they walk. And there's these gross motor stages that you have to go through to then go through the fine motor stages. And all these stages are very important because the top of the fine motor pyramid, if you will, is being able to talk. And so when that's impaired or when that's difficult, then you have kids that sound different. Yeah, because you can't coordinate things as well. But she definitely has no coordination problems whatsoever.
It's incredible. I wish I could do that. So just to kind of go off on what Emily was talking about. So accent is pronunciation. It's how you say something. And dialect is a neutral term, at least that linguists use, that just describes the usage of a certain group. So you can have a regional dialect. You can have a dialect that that a gender in a culture might use. You can have a social dialect. So to talk a little bit about these. Also, this is a really important point to make. Have you ever felt like you don't have an accent? Yeah, and I know I say that I'm from Tennessee, and people don't. That's not something that people usually pick up on unless I start saying y'all, which I will do. And people always say, "Oh, you have no accent," and I always say, "Oh, no, I don't." But everyone has an accent, so no matter where you're from, no matter what kind of English that you speak, everyone always has an accent, and everyone has a certain dialect. So that's something that's important to keep in mind. So, so there are accents and dialects, but how can we describe them? What are some of the differences? So the first thing is vocabulary, so the lexicon. And so this is a question I want to ask everybody. What do you call a brown carbonated beverage? Soda? Okay. If you're asking a waitress, or a waiter, what do you ask for? Coke? Oh my gosh, are you all Oregonians? That's very surprising. You're supposed to say soda. A lot of people, so the difference usually that you find is that, so people from the South, or people from this part of the U.S. will say soda. People from Midland states, like Ohio, will say pop. And people from my part of the country, like the South, will say soda for anything. So even if you're going to go into the store and so like when you ask at a restaurant for a Coke, waitresses will never say, "Oh, do you mean Pepsi?" They'll just bring you whatever they have. So that's interesting that lots of you said. Does anyone say pop? Oh, okay. Where are you from? Salem, Oregon. Really? Okay, yeah. So yeah, this part of the country, like Oregon and Washington, it's always it's never easy, so easy to predict. Okay, so we have vocabulary. We also have pronunciation. So does anyone say these three words differently? I don't. I think they're all the same. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The caught thing is interesting. I guess some people say, so for like the bed, someone would say caught, and to catch something is caught.
Caught.
Yeah, caught. Mm-hmm. And I think that happens in places like Pennsylvania or the Northeast. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Also, there are differences in grammar. So things like in Southern English, you could say you was sitting on that chair instead of you were sitting. Invariant habitual be is very interesting in African American vernacular English. So instead of so to say like is usually or is typically doing something, you can say he be working. And this is just what linguists do. They describe how language is actually used.
And it's interesting to go off of that. That just as I was saying, it's important to know the area that a family's from that's Spanish speaking. It's also important to know if an African American individual is speaking American African vernacular. It is not considered a disorder if they are using a rule-based system that has been established and is an official accent. So they're not going to get services or get help to reduce the way they speak or change the way they speak because it is a true authentic way of speaking.
So like we kind of talked about, there are lots and lots of different kinds of variety. There's gender variety in language, social class, age, ethnicity. Something that's just come out in lots of linguistics research is actually network. So you don't just have one type of friend. You have, like I have friends in linguistics. I have friends who are grad students. I have friends, from outside of school, from sports. And the way you speak in those different networks can be different. And so intersection is actually when those networks come together. And that's a different way. You have a dialect when you speak when those networks kind of converge. So it's very interesting. So this is really important when we talk about accent and variation and dialects. So lots of people have language ideology. So they think, lots of people think that there's one specific way you should talk. There's one specific way, there's a kind of register that you should have. And this has kind of been shown that there isn't just one way people speak. So this language ideology is really based off kind of this idealized language that people have, kind of this image that people have that's typically modeled off how people in the upper middle class speak. So this is important to understand because people do have this, and lots of times it's subconscious, but a feeling that one type of language is better than the other, and that's not necessarily true.
And as a speech-language pathologist, you have to be careful not to hold too strictly to any certain type of ideology, because there are kids that, in my practicum experience, would say their R's, and if they lived on the East Coast, the way they said their R would be perfect, but they live here. So you don't want to dilute someone's way of speaking, but at the same time, if they stand out so different than what is not necessarily acceptable, but what is common amongst the people that they're living with and in their area, then that's important. But
so there's lots of cool ways that linguists and different researchers look at attitudes. One thing that's really interesting that I want to bring up is something called the matched guise technique. Has anyone by any chance heard of this in research? It's very, very interesting. So in order to understand the perceptions that people have, a researcher, and I'll give you an actual example. So to do one of these studies to test the perception of British English, a researcher who spoke two dialects, something called RP, which is the really standard kind of high prestige British English dialect, and Birmingham dialect, Birmingham accent. He could speak both of these dialects totally fluently. So he recorded himself saying the same things, but in those different dialects, and he played them for people. And it's the same person, but he asked them to rate the speaker that they hear on things like likability, attractiveness, perceived attractiveness, intelligence, so many different personality characteristics. And when he would speak in the high prestige language, they would across the board rate him being more attractive, being more intelligent, being even more, like more competent at his job, just by hearing these recorded language. And it was the same exact person, but it really does show you that the accent that you have really affects people's judgment of you. Another way that people test attitudes is actually children's preference. So one research study was done giving children a box that looked very appealing to them, that was filled with gifts. And they were basically asked to listen to speech. And so they were sitting in front of this box, and they listened to standard English and African American vernacular English. And these children, who were all upper middle class raised children, when they would hear, they were more likely to open this box and take the gifts if it was standard English that they heard. Also, people are asked for questionnaires and maps. This is something that's interesting. So people are asked to look at maps and say, and the researcher points to different states and says, okay, rate these states on how good the English is. So you can see the darker states, and I will say the participants for this study are from Michigan. So you can see, oh, surprise, surprise, people from Michigan speak so bad. And the lighter the color, the worse the rating. So I guess the higher the number, the better the score. So, and it's funny because if you see, if this was someone from Tennessee or California, that state would be the darkest colored, and it kind of expands from that. So like the farthest away states typically get the lower rating. So it's very subjective. Some research findings that people have shown, and this is my last slide. So some research has found that if you have a foreign accent, a listener is less likely to find the information that you say is true. So this actually just recently came out. I don't know if anyone saw this. It was like on NPR and the New York Times. But people with different foreign accent and native English speakers were asked to say kind of outrageous, or I guess hard to believe sentences like, zebras are something like this, and just kind of random facts that not many people know. And if the speaker had a very strong foreign accent, people would actually find them less reliable. So native English speakers, when hearing information presented in a foreign accent, are less likely to find that information true, which kind of has a lot of implications. Yeah. Some more information is that students who were found to have, so American English students who had professors and lecturers who spoke with a foreign accent, there was less memory retention, so they remembered less if the person giving the lecture had a foreign accent. There's also been research that shows people who have a good accent or a high prestige accent are considered better people. And this is all just research, that people have done. So people, this was very interesting. There was research on call centers, and people are more likely to have a bad customer experience and to evaluate their service worse if a person has a low prestige dialect. So this was, I guess the participants were British people, so English people, and they heard accents from Indian English speakers, American English speakers, and British English speakers. And the Indian English and American English actually both got very low scores compared to the British, even when the outcome was good and their customer service was good and they got a good result, they still rated their experience as very low. Yeah, it's crazy. Accents lead to stereotypes. So if someone is talking about their political beliefs or their religious beliefs, if they have the same accent as you, you're more likely to agree with them. And on the flip side, if someone has a strong foreign accent, it's been shown that people kind of feel less like a network tie with you. They feel like you're not connected with them somehow in your community, and they're less likely to say that they agree with your opinion. And something else that's been found is that if you speak in a non-standard language and a low-prestige dialect, you're less likely to get a job in an interview, and it can be very difficult for you to get housing. So the Match Guys test was done. People who spoke African American English and kind of your standard media English, they were totally fluent in both. And if they spoke an African American vernacular English, they were less likely to find job offers or housing opportunities. So yeah, it's really incredible how much this really can affect people's perceptions. And I think that's about it. So does anyone have any questions, or do we want to talk a little bit about our own experience and language background? Yeah, you want to go ahead?
Sure. So I had alluded to that learning. My dad is first generation Mexican born in the States, so I'm half Mexican and didn't grow up speaking Spanish. However, I heard him speak Spanish every Sunday when he would call my grandparents. And I think by having heard that, I was able to keep sounds in effect. When you're born, a baby is said to be able to speak any language. And as you grow up older, you lose sound perception of sounds that aren't in your language. So sounds that are in Spanish that aren't necessarily in English, I feel like I was able to retain since I got to hear them as a child. I didn't grow up speaking Spanish bilingually, so I took it as a second language, which presented its own challenges related to accent and dialect and things of that sort. So I took it in school and wanted to become fully bilingual and decided to travel abroad. And the country that was available to me was Argentina. And I was very excited to go to Argentina and had just graduated from high school and went and was startled to hear people speaking Spanish. They weren't speaking the Spanish that I had learned. And they would say things to me, and I felt like I hadn't learned anything. I'd studied it for 6-7 years, and I'm like, I didn't study anything. This isn't... I can't communicate with people. For example, they would say a word, and I would ask them to explain it, and they'd explain, the place where the ocean is, and there's sand, and I'm like, the beach, la playa. I'm like, no, not playa, playa. I'm like, okay. And they're telling me that trying to give me directions. I'm really confused about where they're saying to turn, and I'm like, you're saying calle. No, calle. Okay, so the sh sound was their double L sound, what I had learned as yeah. So it was a whole change of a way of hearing things and a way of perceiving a sound with meaning. But in a few months, I was saying yo llamo, meaning me, yo llamo, as if I had been in Argentine. But it was quite the challenge to go from never hearing that sound, the sh sound for the g sound, and putting it because it really affected the meaning. I didn't understand them. So it was really a surprise, but also fun now to be able to have that accent when I want it. And now working with my Spanish-speaking families that are mostly from Mexico, if I would speak with an Argentine accent, they wouldn't understand me. So I've had to choose when I use certain accents and not. And even within Argentina, there's an area of the province of Córdoba that is known for their kind of sing-songy Cordobés accent that is very different from the Buenos Aires porteño accent. So even within one country, there's very distinguished accents and certain attitudes that are associated with that. People think, oh, the porteños are very snobby, and Cordobés, because of their sing-song accent, are really friendly. So it's interesting how those perceptions are so prevalent in that country.
That's wonderful. Yeah, so I have kind of similar experience. So I am, my foreign language is Japanese. I lived there I lived in Japan for a year when I was 16 and 3 months when I was 19, and I traveled throughout my college career. So I've been to Japan quite a few times, and my passion has always been about learning Japanese. And it's interesting for me because Japanese has a very small phonetic inventory, so that means they have fewer vowels and fewer consonants. So it is it's easier going from English to speaking Japanese to going from Japanese to English. So it wasn't too hard to kind of pick up on the accent, especially because I was there when I was young and I lived with host families. But something that was very interesting to me was when the second time that I went to Japan, I went to a very different location in Japan. It was southern Japan. And in this very small island, in this very, very isolated community, I went to, I don't know if you guys know what woofing is, but I went to go work on an organic farm. And just wanted to do that and get some practice in my Japanese. It was very funny because they speak a very, very distinct dialect of Japanese there up in these mountain villages in a place called Tokushima. And in this village, I remember having a lot of trouble understanding what people were saying because it was so different. And at that point, I felt like my Japanese was very strong. So I was kind of like freaking out that I didn't understand anything. And probably the funniest thing that happened to me was when I was driving up the mountains with my host mom, and she was talking about, I asked her about monkeys, and because I wanted to see monkeys, they're very cute in Japan, and so I asked her if there were monkeys in the forest, if I'd ever be able to see one. And this is kind of a weird thing about Japanese, but there is a very cool verb that you can use that makes things sound, that makes the thing that you're talking about sound, it really like lifts them up. It's an honorific form. And I had heard this form and I knew of it. And you say it for like the emperor or something like that. And it's this verb ending. And she said, well, yes, saru ga oru. And that's the way to say, yeah, monkeys are there, they exist. But she used this verb for like the emperor, and I was just like, what is up with these monkeys? They must be like magic monkeys or something. And then I realized that it was just like this vowel shift had happened. And of course she was saying just the very normal verb for exist. But it really threw me off. And I tried to have this meta-linguistic conversation with her about like why she used that verb. And it was just very confusing and it kind of a bad, I finally got it explained a long time afterwards. But for 3 months, I just thought that there were like magic monkeys around my, like holy monkeys living around my, my little house. So that's probably the funniest thing that sticks out to me. But yeah.
My sister learned Japanese and very fluent. Did the JET program and translates different things. And she has had people tell her she's adopted from Vietnam, so she's Asian. And they hear her speak English, like, oh my gosh, your English is so amazing. She's like, well, I grew up in the U.S., like it should be. But between the two of us, there's a sound, like the L sound and the R sound are very difficult for people who are learning, for Japanese people who are learning English to say. The L sound just doesn't exist.
They just don't have it, yeah.
Yeah, and so if they didn't grow up being exposed to hearing English or hearing it, those would be one of the sounds that wouldn't kind of be available to them, which makes learning a second language so different from one's own really difficult. Many times, and maybe people have had experiences of that, people will say like love and lucky as rucky and rub, and they're trying to say love and lucky. So it's kind of a joke between my sister and I. We sign emails, I rub you, and as a term of endearment. And But it is difficult because people can't hear the difference. And it's not that they don't want to have a better accent or aren't trying to say it correctly. They really are. It is that they just, if you haven't heard something, it's hard to try to create it. So actually, accent reduction is a specialty that speech-language pathologists can go into, and they help people with that exact thing and do similar exercises and to work on sounds and acquiring sounds that people don't have, of knowing how to move their mouth in a certain way that they haven't ever had to before because they don't have that sound in their language. They wouldn't know to move their mouth a certain way, to move their tongue, or to do certain things to make certain sounds. So that's kind of a fun way, I think, that a fun specialty that's in the scope of practice that I've been trained in to help people have an accent that sounds more native to whatever language that they're trying to learn.
And of course, my name is Dushi.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm well aware of that one. That's good.
Right. Has anyone else had any interesting experiences learning a language, or
any questions? Yeah.
How did you guys go on your respective exchanges? Like, you went 16 years old, and how old were you?
I was 18, 19.
18,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because my sister actually went to Argentina through Rotary as an exchange.
Oh, wow.
That's what I did,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Taiwan through Rotary.
Oh my gosh,
Cool.
high five.
Nice.
Yeah, so I was just wondering how you guys went on your exchanges.
I actually went through Youth for Understanding.
Oh, I've heard of that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of German students and really young kids.
Mm-hmm.
They're like 14, 15-year-olds, and I'm like, oh my gosh. But they were learning their fourth language. I had a friend who was German, and I was on a trip with other exchange students, and so there was 3 German girls and me, and we were all speaking Spanish, and then they would speak German, and then she would turn to me and speak German, and I'd tell her in Spanish, like, I don't speak German, like, speak to me in Spanish.
Yeah.
She'd get very mixed up, but it was pretty amazing how many languages they could keep straight. I think there was another comment behind you.
Okay, so actually, I'm Argentine, so hearing when you had the culture shock with Asia, because I'll be at like one of the dining ranges and they're like, "Do pico de gallo?" I'm like, "What?"
Right. Oh, that's great.
So it's been like hard for me to transition because I grew up speaking like the Castellano,
Mm-hmm. El Castellano, yeah.
and oh, that's okay. I have to speak with it. Hello. Okay. I guess I prefer like doing the double L, although sometimes I feel like I have to compensate it.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel like you had to do that, especially when you went to Argentina and had to do the double L with the y sound as opposed to the sh, even though you were learning it?
I feel that's how I have to do it now. I mean, and I kind of have, I don't know if I understood your question right, but I have to, if I am with people that won't understand me, and because I know how I can say it a different way that they will understand me, then I'm going to opt for that one. But I do kind of have a special place in my heart for the Argentinian accent, because that's where I became fully bilingual and things like that. But, you know, it's just, you get to speak to more people when you are able to understand those nuances of language. And but I could understand how you would be really confused if someone's saying, "You want pollo?" and you're like, "What?" And you're like, "Pollo," and then you'd be like, "Oh yes, I would like chicken, please." So
Wow.
that's really interesting.
I didn't know that there was that difference. That's very cool.
Oh yes, it's very marked difference.
That's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then there's also they aspirate sounds. Like the S is aspirated, meaning it's kind of breathy and airy. So not only was the sh sound difficult to understand, but I was in Patagonia, in this very beautifully forested area, and there was this certain tree that's known for being really cold to the touch because there's no bark on it, and it's called the Areshan tree, or Arayan tree, and so it was a forest of these trees. So to say forest of these trees, say Bosque de Arellanes was how I would understand it, but they were saying Bosque de Arellanes. So they were like, what we say, aspirating or making the sound really breathy for the S that made it even more hard to understand. And even my last name, Mosqueda, they would say Mosqueda. Wow. And so it was a lot of new sounds to learn.
Yeah.
Or what sounds not to use. So it's really fascinating, and I think if you're in a position to have it be a fun experience, it can be a fun thing. But if you're needing it for business or needing it for kind of a more serious aspect, it might be really stressful to get it right. Or even if you're needing to ask for medical help or something, like I said, more serious, it could be even those accent differences, even though you're speaking a Latin, a Latin language, you could really have a difficulty getting your point across or getting your message across.
That's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but yeah, in high school I was also an exchange student in Switzerland.
Great.
And Swiss German and just the accent and everything is
so
like crazy
different.
different. And then Swiss German's like different language or dialect depending on kind of where it is and stuff. But I hadn't had a lot of German before that, and then I came back, and then no one understood me in my German classes, and so I mostly had to speak with like this American fake German accent, which was really weird. Wow. And so I was just wondering, you said that you feel like you kind of have to change your accent and not sound Argentine here. Like, and it's hard. And when I go, like I went to Chile before I went back to visit Argentina, and I picked up. It's like I'm an accent chameleon. I pick up whatever accent of where I am, and so in Chile, the Chileans have their own Spanish, totally their own accent, totally their own dialect. It's amazing. They invent words all the time. It's really phenomenal. Like their word for novio, so boyfriend or girlfriend, is pololo or polola, and then they make it into a verb by say pololeando. So like you're going out is pololeando. So it's a really fun thing. But when I went from Chile to Argentina, my Argentine friends were telling me, drop your Chilean accent. You speak with an Argentine accent. And I was like, okay, just give me a few days. Let me get back to listening to the sounds and things like that. But again, the perceived stereotypes or perceptions of people with a different accent, even though they're just over, the Andes Mountains, it's a very different language a very different Spanish. It's fascinating, but yeah, I have to think of who I'm talking to, of what accent to use, and even what dialect to use, what words and vocabulary exist in certain places. And if I said them into a Mexican Spanish-speaking person, they wouldn't know. As an exchange student, I would talk to my parents, and my dad's like, "So I'm sure you've learned some bad words." And I said, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, tell them to me." So I listed off this whole list of bad words that I learned, and he's like, "You didn't offend me at all. I didn't understand you." Good. Yeah, very good. But it was just kind of a fun thing for us to see. But there are bound to be differences, and how different are they? And so it's a fun thing.
Yeah, I know that my Japanese sounds so bizarre because not only am I'm a foreigner, a non-native speaker, but I have the cadence of someone who is from northern Japan because that's where I did my exchange when I was 16. But I have these very marked lexical features of my Japanese that is very southern Japanese. And so I sound very weird and like I'm just from, like I crawled out of a rice paddy somewhere because like they have very, very strong stereotypes about like people who speak kind of like country Japanese. Mm-hmm. So it's very strange when people talk to me and I say these words and they're just like, where did you learn? Where are you from?
I had that when I was in Peru. They speak Peruvians and Central Americans speak very like, I speak very clean, very pure Spanish, mm-hmm. very not a lot of sounds that are exaggerated as they are as much as in Argentina and Chile, or as Mexicans may speak of as well. And they would look at me kind of like, they couldn't pinpoint where I was from. They would listen to my accent, try to see where I was from, like, where are you from? Because you don't sound Peruvian. You don't sound, so they're just trying to, use a little bits of my mm-hmm. of my accent to try to piece together where I would be from, and they had a hard time with that.
I have this really weird thing that I do with my Japanese, is that I never end my sentences with des anymore. I end it with ne. Because I hung out with a whole bunch of schoolgirls in Kawagoe
for 2
weeks, and that's how they end the sentence.
Yeah. And if you're speaking with friends, you never say des, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, even when I would be, like, speaking to my teacher later, I'd be like, ne?
Oh, it's bad. Yeah, I've gotten in so much trouble for things like that, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, though. Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm. What?
They're like, Nakagatuda, Fangajoge, and I'll just be like, what did you say? Like, I don't understand a word they say. And then afterwards, I'm like, what did you say? And they'll try to tell me, and I'm like, what, is that Wolof? They're like, but that's what we learn in Senegal. And I'm like, but then it's funny because I'll call home and I would talk to them in Wolof, and they're like, what are you saying? What is going on here? And then I'll meet people who try to speak French to me, and they'll be like, comment tu t'appelles? And I'm like, comment? What did you say? Because I don't understand. Like, they're French, because it's like so over the top. And I'm like, comment? Like, you know, I don't understand what they are saying. And they're like, sawa? And I'm like, huh? I don't know what you're saying. So it's so hard, but then I will speak to my friends in France, and I'll have them say, répétez, s'il vous plaît, because I don't understand what they're saying as well. And they're like, you need to go back to, to like, read, you know, try to study your French all over again. So.
And where are you from? Are you from Senegal?
No. I'm from the Gambia, which is very close to Senegal, which is another interesting thing, because in Senegal, their Wolof is like spectacular. When Gambians go to Senegal, Senegalese are like, we don't understand what you are saying. And then we don't understand what the Senegalese are saying. Their Wolof is completely different. But yeah. I'm trying to test that of Wolof so that I don't have to take a second language. So it's quite nice.
That's great.
And French as well. So.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Fascinating.
I have a question quickly. For Emily, I guess. So you talked a little bit about working with children who maybe have different accents or dialects. And specifically when the families maybe use a different accent, do you provide therapy in their accent or in standard American English? Or how do you
I actually provide services in Spanish.
Okay.
So so many of my colleagues don't even know that. So I'm not trying to teach them English. I'm trying to help them learn Spanish. So it's really important for me to collaborate with the family to know what types of words they use, names for things. Because, for example, the ones that are really hard for me to know what the family will use for the name pig. There's like 5 different ways to say pig in Spanish.
Really?
Chancho, cerdito, puerquito. I mean, there's just all these different ways to say pig. Same with bubbles. Bombas, burbujas, bubbles. And so you don't want to be trying to have a child name something and you're giving them the model of like, oh, it's called piggy, and they know it as pig, as, to have it be in English, and they're looking like, what? So you want to be able to be modeling things using the word that they use at home, so that you don't confuse the kid more. But that would be a way of trying to utilize their dialect of what do they call certain things. And it's really fascinating to see where the family's from about how they call things different things, which at times can be difficult, having that I learned my Spanish in Argentina, that I have to really pay attention to the way the family says certain words, because how I would instinctively say it could be the total opposite of how the family who's from Mexico would say it. So it's a fun challenge with work. Get to keep learning.
Are there any other questions?
I just have a question for what do you consider Spanglish being? I was born in Mexico, and so I speak Spanish, from Mexican Spanish, I guess. But when I speak to family members, it's so hard for me to just do straight Mexican Spanish, because then I do Spanglish sometimes, and they're like, what? So they're like, you don't speak Mexican anymore, or whatever they say. And I'm like, Mexican, what are you talking about? Or friends to me, they're like, you don't speak Spanish very well anymore. And I'm like, I don't see that, because yeah, my mom too. It's like, what's wrong with you? You're like, you're losing your culture. And I'm like, no, Mom, I'm speaking Spanish. So it's the same thing. It's like when I speak English, they're like, oh, you have an accent. Where are you from? So it's like, okay. So it's like I'm not Mexican, not American. So I'm in between. So what's Spanglish for you? what do you consider that?
Well, technically, I think it's called code switching. So you're using one code for another and things like that. And it's actually, there's a really great talk that was on NPR, I think 2 weeks ago, about being bilingual and how you're really kind of in this nebulous world between languages, because you identify so much with both and yet with none at the same time, that there's kind of this way that you would say part of your sentence in Spanish and part of it in English to have it have the meaning that you really get out of the words that are in each respective language. And I think it's important to be able to communicate like that, and that you're not losing your culture, you're not losing your identity. If anything, your identity is that blend of those two. Mm-hmm. And so to honor yourself by having it be okay that you do use both. And the example that the man that was on the NPR blurb said that a lot of his expressing of emotions was so much easier for him to say "I love you" in English to his wife and his children than it was in Spanish, from his own personal experiences with his dad and relationships in his family, that wasn't, you didn't say "te amo," you didn't say "te quiero," it was expressed differently. It wasn't as verbal and as expressive as it is in English and is in our culture here, that he has acculturated to have be part of himself. So I thought that was really striking, that something as intimate as saying "I love you" was easier in his second language than it was in his first language, but that his past experiences influenced that. So it might be interesting to pay attention even within yourself. What are those words that are easier to say in Spanish or more important for you to say in Spanish versus English? I know that as an exchange student, I just thought it was so great that there are so many gradients of feeling words in Spanish that I could be so much more specific than just the happy, sad, bored, kind of the standard ones that are in English, because there's all these nuances that you can express in Spanish that you can in English. So I thought I could be much more specific in expressing my emotions in Spanish. That was a really neat thing to learn, and I was really surprised that I felt like I could be much more self-expressed, or more accurately self-expressed. So.
I agree with that. I love you. Like in Spanish, you can say "te quiero" or "te amo," and I like having that option.
Yeah.
Just like one in English, so I definitely
yeah.
emotions. I could see myself.
Yeah.
Rely on Spanish.
And I think it's a beautiful. It's just an extra. It's like, I don't know. Just now, it's like it's an accessory in some ways. It's just another way of embellishing the message and getting to have another layer of meaning to it, which is, since you have two languages, really beautiful. Mm-hmm.
I was kind of going off of that. Having been to Taiwan as an exchange student for a year, I can speak Chinese. And over in Taiwan, or from what I can understand in China as well, they almost never say "I love you" unless it's for. Oh, I guess, thank you. They never really say "I love you" unless it's really talking to someone you really do love, like a spouse or somebody you're married to, or
They save it. It's not they save it.
Yeah, exactly. And what I've noticed is that, like here in America, we say, "Oh man, I love you, man," and we say love is kind of either like or love, depending on like that. But what I've actually come to notice is I've dumbed it down a lot because none of my friends would understand. But when I want to really put emphasis on like, "Oh man, I love soda," soda, like I really I love it. And then my mom, while I was in Taiwan, and wanted to learn some Chinese too. And since she started learning Chinese, she understands "I-ni," but she doesn't understand the connotation to it. So even though she speaks English, I always say "I-ni" because I think she's my mom, so I love her.
That's awesome.
That's so cute. Yeah.
That's really cool.
When I first moved here, someone asked me, "Do you like that person?" And I said yes, because in Africa, if you say you like someone, it doesn't mean you mean like you like the person as a human being. Mm-hmm. They took it to mean I love them. And I was so.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Growing up, as an adolescent, my parents wanted me to make that distinction of, you can like people and like things, and versus just immediately jump to the other L word. And so I remember my mom would say, "So, how are things going with so and so?" Like I'm in middle school. She's like, "Are you in like, not in love? Are you in like?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm in like." But it's important to have those gradients of meaning, or to create them if they aren't there. Mm-hmm.
It's all about like facial expressions, and so that's the gradient in it. Because I can say like I like him, I like him, or I can go I like him.
Right. There's so much more.
So it's totally the facial expression that sign language users use as opposed to
Yeah, you can embellish the message so much more.
Yeah, and then you can say, like it's the same thing with like sarcasm or like gradients of like happiness. I can go like, yeah, I'm happy, I'm fine, or I can go like, oh my god, I'm so happy.
Right,
kind of thing,
right.
So like it's all about like the emphasis that you put on the actual sign and the facial expressions you use as opposed to like the words, which I always thought was cool.
Right.
Any other questions? Sorry, you've been
back
waiting
here,
for a
yeah.
while.
Hi. You mentioned learning curse words and explaining that list of words to your father. And it reminds me of studying French in Canada and realizing that there are different ways of expressing when you're angry or using those curse words. And up there, they use words that relate to the Catholic Church, having rejected the Catholic Church. And then I noticed that we use words in English that sometimes have to do with the body. And I'm wondering if in Japanese and Spanish, if you notice that there are categories of words used to explain when you're upset, such as in English or that French that I was thinking of.
I think it's very representative that Japanese doesn't really have curse words. There are definitely ways to say, certain bodily functions that they will use, but it's not at all like in the U.S. where people. Are there any other Japanese speakers in here? I know you are. Yeah, there are a few words that you can say that definitely have the same effect, but you will not hear them as often, and I think that's because language is so powerful in Japanese. There are so many layers to be, to just standard Japanese, and then the Japanese you use for friends, and the Japanese you use to your grandparents and a teacher. So I think that's, and I think in many like East Asian cultures, curse words aren't as common as they are in Western countries or Western cultures.
I think there are more parallels of the kind of straight translations for English curse words to Spanish curse words, or the kind of the themes of them, and they didn't seem to be. They insult the mother a lot. Yeah, I was going to say they insult the mother. They insult the mother, which is kind of like insulting Virgin Mary, I guess, if you're kind of going to a church, the Catholicism connection. Like insulting your mother or your sister. The female is kind of put down pretty quickly. But there are those equivalents in English too. So
this is kind of a little random, but I did want to add that I've also studied Swedish, and in Scandinavian countries, they'll use things that have to do with like the devil or church, but they use. It's very funny because they use these very Shakespearean. Like ways to say things. So I don't know if you guys can remember, but something like "fie upon you," like you would never say that. Just like, I would not, "fie upon you." But in Sweden, "people day" is how you say it, is like a very bad. And I don't think there are any Swedish speakers in here, so I can say that. But it's very funny that they've retained those things that we don't really have anymore in English, but they had them in Middle English or not Middle English, but early modern English.
When I was in Japan, I was in Gunma, which isn't too far from Tokyo, so everyone spoke the Tokyo dialect. When I was in China, my host family spoke 3 different dialects altogether. Whoa. So the grandmother spoke a dialect from Jiangsu, and I was in Shanghai, so my host parents spoke Shanghainese, and then my host brother spoke Mandarin.
Oh my gosh.
And they'd all speak together and understand each other, and I'm the one just like,
What?
And in the
like
morning,
pick one, people. Just pick one and go with that one.
in the morning, I'd be the only person at home with the grandmother, and the grandmother speaking this dialect I'd never heard before. Like I had started picking up Shanghainese, so I was okay, but this was just like,
Don't even.
Yeah. But anyway, I just thought it was interesting how the host brother, who was 15 years old, couldn't speak his family's own dialect. And so I was wondering if your experience in Japan, if you noticed young people, if they couldn't speak the dialect of their hometown, if they only spoke Tokyo dialect, or how that worked out.
I was in northern Japan. I was in Fukushima. It's where close to where where the nuclear reactors went off, to give you kind of an idea. So northern Japan, and I was in a very small town. So I actually noticed that the students in my high school actually did speak with a dialect. It wasn't as strong as my host grandparents, who, I mean, my host grandmother, I would come home and she would like have cricket legs all over her knit sweater because she had been roasting crickets. Like, that's how country these people were. It was awesome, trust me. But
crunchy
so,
and awesome.
yeah, crunchy, exactly. What are these? Oh my God. But so I noticed that it wasn't as strong, but they definitely, and especially when they were in groups, kind of not talking about school, but talking about what they were going to do over the weekend, they would use some very marked forms that I would have to ask them what they meant because they were not Tokyo Japanese. Like markers like be, I don't know if you know that, but ikube, things like that. Mm-hmm. That's really cool, though.
Wow.
Well, actually, mine's kind of just like his story, because in Taiwan there's Taiwanese Hokkien, and then there's Mandarin Chinese, and most of my host parents and grandparents spoke Taiwanese Hokkien and Mandarin fluently, so they'd be speaking to Chinese, and I'd be like, okay, I can understand them. All of a sudden they'd switch, and I'm like, well, they're obviously trying to leave me out somehow, so we'll just leave it at that, and I'd be watching TV or something. But then I really noticed is a lot of my host siblings were about my age, and almost none of them could speak Taiwanese Hokkien because they realized that, well, at least I think my host parents mostly realized that Mandarin Chinese is the more prominent business language, and while Taiwanese Hokkien would be the kind of the cultural language of the entire island, it's just like more of a young thing to learn Mandarin and not Taiwanese, and it's very rare. You can find, or more increasingly rare. I mean, you still find people all the time who can speak both in whatever age range, but it's increasingly rare to find people who speak both Mandarin and Taiwanese Hokkien at my age, or at least people in the same age area.
It's that high prestige, you know. I'm sure they're ashamed.
That's a tragedy.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, like your mom saying, "Are you losing your identity, losing your culture?" And those kids don't even get to formulate it, and they're losing already. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to become bilingual is because I wanted to speak to my grandparents. I didn't have that relationship, and that was motivation enough. I mean, put aside the indirect bonuses of being able to speak a second language, but the first one was so I could speak to my family members. And unfortunately, and it sounds like in this situation, they don't even get that option. They're not even learning what their grandparents know how to speak and things like that. So it's really too bad. It's really a tragedy.
I had kind of a similar code switching situation in Japan because I was talking with my host sister. And it was mind boggling because she was telling my homestay mother, her mother, that we were going to go to the store and get a soda. And she told us that, and she spoke very politely and very formally. And then as soon as we got out of the house, she lit up a cigarette and, like, dropped all of the desses. Everything was all of a sudden informal. She's speaking much more quickly, and I'm just like, holy crap.
Who are you?
Like,
yeah, it's
how do
really
you do that?
marked in Japanese. Yeah.
It was ridiculous.
It's almost like you have to learn a different language depending on, you know, if you're just speaking like to not a friend, a close friend, but just like someone your own age, if you speak to someone who's younger than you, if you speak to a teacher, if you speak to someone, I mean, there are even ways to like, there's a standard language, there's a language to raise up the speaker that you're talking with, so to make them honorable, but there's also a way to denigrate or deprecate yourself. So it's like all of these levels, and it is very hard to master. Yeah, and even for native Japanese speakers, it's very hard.
It was ridiculous, and like I was younger than her, but like I could tell that she was trying to make me not feel bad, so she talked to me like I was an equal, even though I was like 5 years younger than her. So I'm like trying to express that I recognize what she's doing, but still trying to like talk to her like she's better, and I'm like, I gotta know how to do this.
yeah, it's exhausting. Any other questions? Oh, we have one back here.
Yeah, this is back to the Taiwanese Hokkien thing. My mom's Taiwanese, but she never taught me. Like, my mom and dad decided not to teach us Hokkien because for a couple of different reasons. But the Taiwanese part of my family, they choose not to because they felt that if they learn Hokkien first, they'll have a really strong Hokkien accent when they speak Mandarin. Wow. So they didn't really want that. For my family, it's a different reason. We had a couple different languages going on. So because of that, they don't really want to do the Hokkien thing. There's just something in like Hong Kong, like there are parents, they don't really speak English that well, but they insist on speaking English to their kids because they don't want their kids to have like, I don't know, a Cantonese accent when they speak English, but it doesn't really work.
It doesn't really work. I love it. Yeah, it's interesting when the research supports that if a child is being exposed to two languages, which a lot of Spanish-speaking kids these days are, it's hard to keep a very pure monolingual home with TV, radio, going out your door. I mean, you're just bombarded in English. And but what I really try to encourage my families is to really support the home language, the first language, make it a priority. That learning one language, your first language, well will help you and facilitate learning your second language. And it's very difficult here. There's, they enter preschool or they enter Head Start, and it's English. And they hardly, especially if they have a language delay, they hardly have their first language. Mm-hmm. So I feel like there's this growing population of these kids that are in this gray area that don't know Spanish very well, don't know English very well, and they're going forward in life, and I'm really hoping the best for them, because it's hard, especially if you have a language delay, to get caught up in your first language, let alone learn a second language, if learning a language at all is difficult for you. So it poses different challenges, especially to families that want their children to be able to be ready to learn English and be successful learning English, and will sometimes forego speaking the home language and will try to speak in their broken English or in their very heavily accented English to their child instead of teaching them their home language, whatever that may be, because they want them to have more success in speaking English. So there's all these different situations now that we're becoming more globalized, and English is a very dominant international language. It is most likely the first second language people learn, or among them. So it's really interesting. Yeah.
But I find myself finding it really hard understanding the British people. Like, I love Britain. I love British English. Mm-hmm. I'm a huge fan of Britain a lot, and I love their English, but I cannot understand anything they say at all. Like, even though I have accent of my own when they speak, I cannot understand them. But of course, that is also true when Americans speak. I don't understand what they say sometimes. I mean, when I first came here, that was a difficulty for me. I had to tell the teacher, can you go slowly, because I just couldn't understand it. In my native country, we used to kind of like laugh at that when foreigners come, tourists come to our country, and they'll start speaking, and, when they come to the, towns, and, when they go home, we'll be like, did you remember those guests? They spoke really fast. They spoke with their nose, and we'll try to like make examples of that. And it's not because we are like trying to stereotype them, but it's because it's so fascinating. It's not something we know. It's like
it's different. You want to describe it in the best way you can with what you can. At least from my end, I'll take a shot at it, and then I'm interested to see what your take is on it. British English has 12 vowels. American English has 6 vowels. So even just the vowels alone, and Spanish has 5. So there's things that are in American English and British English that are similar versus that they have diphthongs. So oi is an example of a diphthong with the O and the I for toy, boy, things like that. And those can be elongated or changed if you're in British English, and maybe they might not be diphthongs, might be triple things, to make them more vocalized. And then versus Spanish, for example, they don't have any. So it's all pure vowel. So having, I'm actually teaching a young woman English right now, and trying to find a way to describe how to say a vowel that she doesn't know she's never had to say before, like what's considered a schwa. That's not, it's a, or it's e, or it's a, but it's not So I'm like, oh, how do I describe this? Like, so I just try to say it over and over and over again a lot. Or the I sound is as an English vowel, and I'm sure that it's in British English in some place, but that's at least one of the big differences. Is
who I was talking to today, and I said, if you stretch out the alphabet from A to Z, the Americans speak it smoothly smoothly past the alphabet, whereas the British would have like scratch marks, where like everyone else who are not like like at the end, like if it's A, when the British say something in English, they'll say smoothly, and then at the end there will be like some scratch mark. Whereas if you are a foreigner, like maybe like from Africa or like this Asian world or the Spanish world, you probably put marks all over the alphabet. Trying to
figure out what
I like
changed.
that.
Yeah, that might be helpful.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I think you explained British English perfectly. It's very different, and actually, it's interesting because I would think that with so much media exposure of American English, you would think that kind of they would come together, but actually, linguists have found that they are just growing farther and farther apart, and maybe in 100 years or in 200 years, it will be even more difficult and almost impossible to the opposite. To understand. So American English speakers would actually need to learn British English because they will be so different, which is very interesting. Yeah, and it's very hard for me to understand British English sometimes. Like even watching Harry Potter, it's just, what? Ron, what did you say? Say it again. Yeah. We have them?
In your opinion, is there any dialect of English that is more standard that you would say is like a standard dialect of English?
There's, considered to be a standard like media English that people speak
on the news.
Yeah, on the news. So that's, I would say, but it's not really a language that anybody actually speaks, if that makes sense. So I think there are accents that people typically find to be close to that media English, and I think it's like Midland English, so something that so English that's spoken like in Ohio and the Midwest. So that's something I grew up speaking because my parents are from Ohio, and I think that's pretty. It's hard for me to say because that's how I speak. But it's very interesting. I was in a class with students who'd never taken linguistics before, and one girl who's obviously from Portland, I could tell because of the way she said a couple words, or that area, and I remember her saying, well, I just really think that Oregonian or Pacific Northwest English should be taught because it's just so much more clear. And I just said, oh, you did not just say that. Because she thinks it's clear, but I think a person who speaks with like Appalachian English is very, very clear, whereas someone who had never grown up with that or heard that, they would find it very odd and jarring. So I don't know if I could say there's one most standard, but probably something like that's close to media English or radio English. Mm-hmm.
What are some of the differences you notice between Ohio English and the Midwest? Our English, because I guess you could say like root and root and roof and roof, or I can't do it, but crick and creek. Yeah.
The one thing that I really notice is the way people say E's and G's here. So my friends from like Oregon and Seattle, or Portland and Seattle, or like Washington and Oregon will say things like Megan instead of Megan, or I would say Megan, and they would say Megan. Instead of egg, they would say egg. Also tag, I say tag, and they say tag. It's like very, I don't like it.
So it's the vowels.
Yeah, it's definitely the vowels, definitely the vowels.
The vowels.
And also, I had never heard the term creeper until I moved here. Yeah, I know and I don't know if that was just like a new innovation when I became a college student, or it was something that they use in the Northwest here, but I was just like, what does that mean?
What about the word spendy? Did you hear the word spendy before you came here?
Like, what is that? Like pricey?
Yeah. That's pretty spendy.
That's spendy? Yeah, I don't know if that's a regional, what do you think?
Because was it?
Our linguistic anthropology teacher thinks it is.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because he actually had a poll in our anthropology class, and he was like, okay, so people from out of state, people from like California, have you ever heard of the word spendy? And a lot of people were like, what?
But there are like no people from outside of California and Oregon, but not. Yeah, I don't know. I think that I had heard that, but I'm not sure. That's a good point. I'll have to ask some people about that. I'll ask my parents.
New Jersey, and so like it's weird because people think that a lot of people from New Jersey have this like New York accent, but really if you cut the state in half, North Jersey has more of the New York accent, and then Southern New Jersey kind of has its own little twang, which is where I'm from.
Sure.
And so I've noticed for like water, we say wooder.
Oh, that's different.
Yeah, and then what was another one? apparently I say orange.
Excuse me.
So it's like kind of a New York accent with like a twist, I guess. So I don't know what other words, but it's weird. So when I say I'm from New Jersey, people are here like, why don't you have an accent? I don't get it.
Yeah.
But I round some things, but it's pretty interesting.
One thing that I think I never noticed that American English speakers do, I think it's across all regional dialects of American English, but and my friend, one of my best friends is from Israel, and he's a non-native speaker of English, and he says the most annoying thing that American English speakers do, they don't release their final consonants. So instead of saying what, we say what. And it's very difficult because, he'll try the difference between can and can't. It sounds very obvious when I enunciate like that, but really, I mean, the difference is so minuscule when you're speaking, kind of your colloquial, natural speech. And he says it's so hard because it's like can, can't. It's very difficult to perceive if you don't have the ear for it. So.
I notice I cannot tell somebody speaking a different kind of dialect from, like, for me, all English is the same. So
yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Wow.
Yeah, I think
maybe that's better.
Yeah. You might get accustomed to it. Have you traveled a lot around the U.S.? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh. Yeah. And that's why I love talking about accents and dialects because, everyone can always think of a story. Everyone can always think of a time when, you're just like, wow, what does that mean? Why are you saying it like that? So I feel like I'm so lucky to study what I do because it's like can be exciting for everyone. Yeah, that's great.
Really quickly, the water thing, I had a neighbor growing up, and she's from New York, and she'd always say, like, do you have water? And I'm like, I don't get it. But that's interesting they say in southern New Jersey that they do that. But one thing I've noticed, I'm from Nevada, and people from up here say Nevada, and it's not like that at all. And it's funny because
you're wrong.
I was trying to watch it. No, and I was trying to watch the football game a couple months ago, and the ESPN analysts are like, and Nevada's doing terrible. And I'm like, it's not Nevada. Like, you're the reason why they're losing. But it's interesting because I think about, like, people from their own states or from their own countries, how they will pronounce where they're from in a certain way. I'm from Nevada. I know it's pronounced Nevada. I also speak Spanish, so don't try to be Spanish when you say Nevada, because that's not even how you pronounce it. But how like everyone else thinks that they're right because the vast majority thinks that pronunciation is correct. And I mean, have you ever run into like things where just like the vast majority thinks that they're correct with a certain pronunciation of like words from a dialect or something like that?
I've definitely come across that. I know I grew up next to the Great Smoky Mountains, which is a part of the Appalachian, mountain range, but most people here say Appalachia. And it's Appalachia. So, and it's weird because, people ask me, are you sure? And it's like, I live right there. I go there every year. But it's interesting, because I don't know this for sure, but intuitively I think that most people do think it's Appalachia and not Appalachia. So it's interesting.
I was just going to say that.
Oregon?
I have family from the Midwest. They say Oregon, and I'm like, it's not Oregon, it's Oregon. I mean, it's not. They say I just said it mostly the same. But they change it.
I talked to my my great aunt on the phone, and it's like she's never heard the word before because she says, "How is it in Oregon?" And it's like, no. Why do you think that?
Exactly.
Have you never heard the word before? So it's I've definitely. Oh, I said that. I said Willamette. Willamette, yeah. It should be Willamette.
I saw an option shirt that said that
I'm a good linguist.
That saw Willamette spelled out phonetically like a bunch of times and crossed out in the very end. It said, it's Willamette, damn it.
I need that. Because I remember walking around and being like, excuse me, where's Willamette Hall? And people were just like, no. No.
Whoops.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, I have one question. So where were most of the people from that said Nevada? Because... Oh, I was just going to say, because, like, everyone I know, at least up in Salem, say.
California, they're the only ones I've
Because I almost think it's like a distance thing, because at least everyone I've met here in Oregon have said Nevada, and I have I had grandparents live in Nevada, so I've always pronounced it Nevada, and yeah, and then yeah, so that's just kind
and
of
like we've said, like if you say it differently, you don't have the kind of, you're not speaking my language. So if you say it differently, then they're kind of an out, and they're in the out group. So
yeah, like I saw
it's important to say it right.
Yeah, I saw this really interesting on YouTube, how reliable of a source that is. But so I saw something on YouTube, and they're doing an interview of people in Nevadans, basically, and they're like, okay, so if somebody came up to you and said, so where in Nevada do you live or something, what would you think of them? They're like, oh, they're not from here. They don't speak my language. And they actually got really mad at a lot of presidents or a lot of people running for presidents, because if they said Nevada instead of Nevada, they'd actually get really mad, because you're in our state. You should say it right.
Say it like a native, like a local.
Yeah, we have lots of places in Tennessee named after French names and French words. And it's so funny to hear people try to say them, because you'll have a name like Lafayette, and people will try to say it like that, but oh no, it's Lafayette. It's Lafayette. Yeah. Oh, Fayetteville. Oh yeah. And there's so many like that.
This is a kind of like random aside, but I always found it interesting how people who speak different dialects but say words that are foreign and pronounce them, and how it's kind of different based on where you're from. For, like, I don't know. In the U.S., like Kafka, we'll say Kafka, and then my brother-in-law will say Kafka, and he's Scottish. And then in Czech or whatever, it would be like somewhere in between, but then like our default in American English for all of the A's is always to do or not in like foreign words in Spanish. They'll be like oblas or something. Yeah. and then in
that's not right.
In generally, I think in the UK it'll be like ablas or something, which is also not right, because it's somewhere in between. And I just found it really weird that we go with like such opposites there.
I have a text in my Arabic class, and it's hilarious.
I bet.
Or try to talk. Because just the vowels that are in Arabic are not the vowels that you use in Texas at all. So they're like trying to say it right, and we're just going.
They're not the vowels you
They're
use
just
in Texas.
That's great.
Let's see, I wanted to make a comment to yours about I don't know, what came to me when you said that about why would we pronounce it a certain way if it's something foreign. I think we're just trying to utilize the sound-to-letter correspondence that we've learned in our native language about how to read, and however well you learned how to read, that wasn't me, you'll put that sound correspondence to that letter and kind of give it your best shot, because if you've never heard the word, you don't know how it's supposed to sound. So that might be why there's such a varying way of saying it.
Probably have more in our
so it's kind of like flatter, I guess.
Yeah,
or a flatter sound, or it's kind of how the language chooses to say it.
Accents, and French people like to, like, for example, if they say actor, they will say actor, and then you meet an American who's trying to make this accent, and what comes out is just like something just flat, and you're like
Edder.
You're like, what? That's not how you say it. It's the opposite. But I think it's because people. That's my theory. Obviously, that's not something that is proven scientifically, but I think people get so walked up on the accent stuff because
they want it to sound right.
Exactly. Like when I read lots of British newspapers, I am so much into the British newspapers, and when I read it, I try to sound British, but because of my whole kind of like thoughts is I need to sound British, but when a British person hears me like saying this, they'll be like, where are you from?
Yeah, overcompensation is actually a really well-studied thing in linguistics. It's very interesting when people perceive a certain part of speech or any kind of sound to be high prestige. They will actually, people who want to sound like that will use it too much, almost to a point where it sounds unnatural. So it's kind of interesting to think about that. It's like you're kind of overshooting a little bit.
kind of going off of that, could that also play into how like we interpret how other people speak when they like how other people sound when they speak other languages? Because I find that to be kind of related to accents. Because people who speak French, when we speak fake French, it sounds French, but then it does not sound French to them at all. And then it's like, we had a German exchange student, and we asked him, okay, well, you speak German. What does English sound to you? And he's like, oh, wah, 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 wah. And it was just like...
I love stuff like that. That's great.
Yeah, and so I was kind of like, I don't know, I was wondering, would you consider that a part of accents as well? I mean, I find it to be...
Well, it's all about what you perceive. So actually, that's kind of close to what I study. So I'm actually looking at, what about the way Americans speak makes them sound accented in Japanese. And it's stuff that intuitively I would never think as a Japanese learner. But the biggest thing that corresponds to a high perception of foreign accent if you're speaking Japanese is vowel length. So Japanese, it has contrastive vowel length. So a long, short and long vowels can change the meaning of something. And it's, from the data that we looked at, if your long vowels aren't long enough, that is the thing that's going to make you sound most accented, which I thought was really interesting. It's not something that I expected. So, it's always, what are people actually listening to when they listen to accent?
Certain frequencies.
Yep.
Sound frequencies.
Yep.
Emily, as a speech pathologist, so we learn about, I'm a CDS major.
Oh, great.
We learn about, like the articulation issues and fluency issues and things. So you work in Spanish with Spanish-speaking children. Are there specific, like, fluency issues, articulation issues within the Spanish language itself? Is that what you work on with kids mostly?
Yeah, I mean, I have done and I am doing my best to stay educated on what is Spanish-specific articulation and phonological sound errors in their speech. Fortunately, there's a lot of similarities with English. So kids at different stages in life are leaving off the first sound. So they might say, for horse, they might say bayo. Or kids really like to mix it up, they say bacayo instead of caballo. So they're switching sounds around, leaving them off, putting in new ones. They'll say dato for gato and things like that. So patterns of sound replacement that are in a pattern, fortunately, are seen. They're similar, if not the same, in both Spanish and English. So having learned it in English, I can recognize, this child is using a stop sound, like a D or a T for S. A lot of kids that I'm working with now are saying T's for S's, and things like that. So I can utilize my English knowledge of phonology and errors into Spanish, but at the same time I'm utilizing Spanish research that's being done a lot out of Temple University about what are error patterns and articulation errors. But fortunately, they're similar.
So it's not all like lexicon development, it's also fluency and replacements and things like that. Interesting.
Yeah. So I guess adding to that, I know you say you work with them in Spanish. Is there any, their fluency disorder, does that continue on to English? Because I know that they are bilingual, like they speak Spanish and English. Is there a way that they have a fluency issue in Spanish but it doesn't translate to English?
So fluency as in stuttering?
Fluency or articulation. I chose fluency to ask you, but I mean any communication disorder.
Well, for the kids that for kind of seeing if a kid would be a good candidate to evaluate, is you want to make sure that there is a sound error. The research says if a sound error is in one language, it would also be in another language to be a true disorder. So it doesn't matter which language you're speaking, that sound error is going to be there. So that's a real clear marker if it's a true disorder that would be in both languages. Regarding fluency, specifically being stuttering, like I said at the very beginning, that speech is a very fine motor activity. The motor planning and placement for your mouth, lips, tongue, teeth, and things like that in Spanish may not be impacted in English. I haven't seen, I had a little guy that's in kindergarten this year who had begun to stutter at the end of his time with me. I'm not sure if his English is now impacted. I would imagine that it is, and it's an interesting phenomenon because it's a different set of sounds, a different set of patterning to make those different sounds. It's been interesting to see kids that grow up in a monolingual Spanish home, and yet they can't hardly say any Spanish words for the life of them, but they can say English words much easier. A lot of early child vocabulary in English is single-syllable words, and in Spanish it's already 2 and 3 syllables. So if it's hard to coordinate everything to say one syllable, God help you if it's 2 and 3 syllables just to say like ball, or something simple that would be in a child's vocabulary. So I kind of feel for the kids that are learning Spanish in that way, because we look at, when a kid's trying to build a vocabulary, if they're a late talker, get a list of 10, 15 single-syllable words to start to build and their vocabulary. But in Spanish, that same list of simpler early words could already be 2, 3 words, 2, 3 syllable words.
So if the family is mainly a Spanish speaking family, so even if they're having more difficulty with the Spanish, you want to continue speaking Spanish and creating that foundation before switching over to English and confusing them and confusing their family.
Right.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I used to be so fluent in another language, which is also spoken in Gambia, called Jola, and I was so good at this language that people used to think of me as someone from that tribe. But when I moved here, when I cannot speak it, like people will call me and try to speak in that dialect, and I'm like, and they just realize I don't speak it. Why do you think that is? And the follow-up question to that would be, why do you guys see it as a disorder? Why do you call this kind of like accent or dialect thing a disorder? Because it's quite interesting.
So the first part of the question, I'd be curious to know your thoughts on it too. Do you want to go first?
Probably because of exposure. I would imagine that you speak that a lot less now. And that would probably be the reason. I mean, I know you can learn, even if you've been, it's been shown that, like, even if you speak a language your whole life, if you stop speaking it and you're not exposed to it, you're in America now and it's not on TV, it's not on the radio, you're not hearing it kind of like in the ambient environment, it can disappear.
Use it or lose it.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that's what's happened with my Japanese. I haven't been there, and I don't have a lot of Japanese friends who speak Japanese with me, and I've lost so much of my proficiency because of that. So, yeah, use it, practice.
But I think if you were immersed in that tribe with that language, that after not too long of time, you'd pick up where you left off, which I've always been grateful when I've gone back to visit, because I pick up where I left off and learn some more, and then I can stop there and then leave the country, and when I come back I can pick up there and learn even some more.
Speak it, impossible. I cannot speak it like I can't, and this was a language that I knew so much that people would, when they hear me speak it, they'll be like, you are. When I tell them, no, I'm Fuller, they're like, no, you are Joel. You definitely not.
Yeah. It might be interesting to spend time again with people who speak that language and see it come back, because it's in your brain, it's in there. You've made those motor patterns with your, to make the sounds and to connect it together. It's in there. You just have to use it some more.
Why do you see it as a disorder?
And I don't think that's a disorder. I think having your accent, having your dialect is important, and to know, as a speech language pathologist, it's important to know what are accents and what are dialects, to know then what's deviant from that. That people who are speaking a certain language and dialect, that if someone has a disorder, they're going to be the odd thing that sticks out, like, oh, you don't sound like the rest of us. That's really off. Or errors. A lot of times they say little kids sound so cute when they say bunny wabbit. Well, bunny wabbit is, the child's using a W sound for the R sound, and it's cute, but it's not how we say bunny rabbit. So in that kind of way, we want to correct how to say it. Unless there was a group of people that legitimately called them bunny wabbits, then within that group of people, bunny wabbit would be correct. Yeah. So it's kind of, it's again perspective, and we've kind of made collective, almost an agreement of that this is what everyone is speaking versus these people, and we kind of want people to be able to fit in. We want people to be able to identify with the in-group to feel like they belong. Yeah.
And that's very different from an accent and a dialect.
Yes.
confusing, like saying a T instead of an S, or what is the direction? Is it?
Yeah, they would say the T for the S.
Yeah, I mean that really hurts your your
little,
ability to
you can't be understood.
Yeah, exactly, and that's not something they can really choose either.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Cut this short. Thank you so much to our speakers for joining us tonight. If you guys have questions, still, I'm sure our speakers would be happy to talk as we close down. But thank you guys all for coming. Thanks to the speakers. If you guys want to watch it later, it will be it's all taped and will be available online. If you go to the UO Library's webpage, you can do a search for community conversations, and it'll be up one day. So thank you for joining us, and have a good night.
Thank you.